My name is Dan Wohl, and I've been the case manager at the Taos Men's Shelter for about 5 years. I have a background for almost 40 years in various behavioral health settings around the country. Prior to this, I was working at a place called Tri-County in Taos, and shortly after they went out of business, I was given a chance to come here and work as a case manager, so I took that. Our primary goal is to provide for people's basic needs, a safe and supportive environment here, literally a roof over people's heads and food and clothing. And if those needs are met, many can stay here longer term and work with myself in case management, which might include various things that are barriers to being housed. People might need their documents. They might need to apply for Social Security. Some people need, of course, everybody, for the most part, could use housing assistance programs that are available. Some have legal issues they need help with, or at least need to be directed to where they can get help. Some have substance abuse or dependence, and we can direct people for help for that if they're willing to. Everybody has different individual needs, but one thing everybody has in common is that by definition, if they're not housed, if they need to be in a shelter or else they're on the street or camping or something less safe. We serve dinner once a day in the evening, and people are able to come who aren't residents here. Women come. We're a men's shelter, but anyone in the community can come for dinner. And then we have other food that we get or donated. We redistribute those to people. Some people come and just get food during the day. Even though we're closed, I'm here working usually during the day, and I can give out food. Also clothing. All of our services are available to the community, not just residents of the shelter. Well, we're pretty much a standard model for a shelter. If we have some things that are unique or that we're a little different, at least, is that we do have people who can stay here longer than is typical. Because I found in the past that putting an arbitrary time limit, while it sometimes is helpful if things are crowded, people, especially in a market like Taos, it's tough to find housing, sometimes quickly. Sometimes it takes longer. As long as people are working on their goals and being productive and showing effort, we let people stay longer term than many shelters would. Yes, the Taos Men's Shelter does provide day services. Primarily, case management would be in that category. The idea that we would have a world where everyone is sheltered is, to me, unlikely. But we can certainly make a lot of progress to reduce the number of people who are unsheltered. Some people choose not to use shelters, and I guess if you mean sheltered or housed, it's generally not possible to shelter every unhoused person for a variety of reasons. Some would choose not to stay in shelters. Some have problems with safety and so forth, where they can't really be in a shelter. We could house virtually everybody if we had the will as a society to do that, and political will. It's more or less a political problem and an economic problem, but the money exists for HUD to be fully funded and not have waiting lists. More housing can be built virtually everywhere where it's needed. Um, there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen. It's not a simple thing that can be adequately discussed in just a couple of minutes, but it's the political part of it is just facilitating an environment where private businesses or government can create more housing, affordable housing. Because on one level, the reason why people are homeless is because housing markets around the country don't provide much low income or affordable housing. And the disparity between people who can afford housing and people who can't is growing. As prices go up, Taos is a good example of that. We have plenty of rentals in Taos. We just don't have very many affordable rentals for people, even people who are working, who are making at or near minimum wage, really can't afford housing in Taos. And then the political part of it is where can you build new housing? And that's always difficult. There's zoning regulations. There's lots of stuff that could be accomplished by government at the state, well, the local level first, state and federal level. The federal level is funding the big programs. We recently had what I think should always be the case, but it was emergency housing, that started during COVID, and now that's ending. In normal times, it takes a long time to even get a housing voucher, just because there's a waiting list and they open and close the availability of vouchers because it's not fully funded. So people who even qualify, who need help, assistance, don't get it or they just have to wait, basically. So there's a whole spectrum of things. And then on the individual level, people have barriers from mental health issues, serious mental illness, of course, medical issues, disability, addiction, which is a medical issue. There's a whole variety of things that hinder individuals, but there's also things on the bigger level. Basically, there's a saying or a model called housing first, which I generally support, which says that no matter how many of these other problems an individual might have, we could still provide housing. And then that stability I talked about with the shelter would also help people, maybe it's been shown through research that people who get housed are then more able to work on their other problems and possibly get treatment for medical or mental health issues or do other things they might need to do to start being more self-sufficient. Does everybody always do that? No. There's no 100% simple solution to any of this, but all these factors would make a big difference in reducing it a lot. If nothing else, housing an individual, no matter what other problems they have, is harm reduction, and it helps that person be safe, if nothing else. So an individual who presents to the shelter for assistance has certain responsibilities, and so we will unconditionally take someone in short term, like they need help. If someone is safe to be here, they can be here. And by safe to be here, I mean, not violent, threatening, or in some way unsafe. Beyond that, if somebody wants to stay longer term, they do have to take responsibility for some things. And I mentioned some of them before. So to me, you can't be responsible for something you're not aware of. Um, Taking responsibility is really about acting on what your awareness is. It requires action, so it requires effort. You might know that you need treatment for, your alcohol dependence, but until you do something, act on that, you're not really taking responsibility. So responsibility can involve accepting help, or it can be seeking help from, it can be making an effort to address other things that you might need, getting your birth certificate and social security card and um, an ID or a license, might be resolving legal problems. Um, so when I work with somebody here who wants to stay longer term, so first of all, that person has to want the help, and they might ask for it, or you know, so that's a start of taking responsibility. Um, Going out and looking for a job, or if you're disabled and can't work, then making that claim with Social Security, which can take a while, but it's a process. So initiating and being part of that process is taking responsibility, because income is something that you need, even if you get a housing assistance. Very few landlords will rent whether you have a voucher or not if you don't have some income. Um, Whatever people feel about it, you need these documents to function. Having a phone, having a vehicle, these are all barriers to people being housed in some cases. Taos does have a bus system, but if you want to if you want more choices where to live, getting a vehicle greatly expands where you can live. So a quicker, simpler answer is you take responsibility by your actions, and you accept help. And yeah, that's on the most basic level. So what I do is work with people on goals and a plan to achieve those goals. And if I see people making that effort, and they're going out every day, and there's something tangible or observable that they're doing, then I try to give people the time and space to do it and help where needed, support. As case manager, I provide support and also information, and sometimes help people get opportunities to do their work. They have to be part of the process. Yes, having boundaries and structure, as I would put it, is essential for running a shelter or any organization. And by that I mean you can't have a safe environment without it. And if you don't have a safe place for people to be, then nothing else of value is going to happen. And it actually can be detrimental to people. Many of the people who come here have been at shelters in other parts of the country or other cities, even Albuquerque or Santa Fe. And the one thing they always say is that they didn't feel safe there. And people might be using drugs on the property, smoking fentanyl, or there might be violence and threats going on. And in that kind of environment, people aren't going to generally make a lot of progress toward changing their life for better. And people do get hurt. And some of these shelters in parts of the country are basically pretty unsafe places. Now, we can't be perfect, but we're a small shelter, and we have some basic rules and boundaries. For example, we have pretty much zero tolerance for violence, even threats of violence. We don't allow drugs and alcohol to be brought back to our property or used here to the extent we can control that. We're not saying people have to be sober to be here, but they have to behave safely. So that's step one. Other parts of the structure are that we have meals at a certain time every day. We have everybody here is expected to help keep the place livable, and they have chores that they need to do, and they need to keep their living space certainly not perfect, but at least, fairly good. Some of this is subjective, of course, but our staff, we can all see, and everybody here can see that what people are doing or not doing. But yes, before you can make any other kind of progress, and this is true in behavioral health programs as well. We're not a behavioral health program, but the principles of meeting basic needs first, having a structured environment, maybe not so rigid or whatever that it's difficult. We're not looking for compliance. We're looking for adherence to things because they make logical sense. It's not arbitrary. Probably doesn't need a lot of explanation to say why we wouldn't want violence happening here. Drugs being used on the property, because we have people who are trying not to do that, and triggering them is not helpful, and it can be unsafe. So basically, we allow residents only in the shelter, but we still can provide to the community outside of the shelter. And we don't have a lot of rules. A lot of shelters have a lot more rigid and strict rules, but with bigger shelters, it's difficult to enforce some of the things I've just been talking about. One thing we can do, being small, is have a pretty good handle on that stuff. So if someone can't be at the shelter and then later gets hurt or even dies, it's not an easy question to say who's responsible for that. I don't believe we're responsible for that, because the only reason we would exclude somebody is for two reasons. One reason is we're completely full and we can't take that other person. Because, there's potentially hundreds of people who might want to come here. Some of them might have problems if they can't stay here, but the fact is everyone can't stay here. The other reason is what I mentioned before, which is if they're unsafe. I don't think it's possible for us to take responsibility for someone else's behavior. Our purpose is not to control their behavior or to we're just evaluating whether this person is safe here. And, I could flip that question around and say, what if we admit somebody who shouldn't be here and then somebody gets hurt or dies? So a person can die away from here for any number of reasons. It could be violence, crime, could be ODing on drugs. These are all things that have happened and happen every day for people who are not at the shelter. No one has died in this shelter that I know of. What happens outside of this shelter is not in our control. And we certainly can't admit potentially thousands of people to this one shelter that has the capacity of 12. So yes, some people will be excluded. When it's really cold out or something, we have some options. One is we can allow a couple extra people to come in. We can allow people to warm up, or give them food, give them more clothing, give them camping gear. We can, if we see somebody who looks like they're suffering from hypothermia or frostbite or something like that, we can call an ambulance, and they'll be taken and taken care of. The scenario that you brought up of someone being turned away and then dying, at least in the immediate aftermath of that, I'm not aware of anybody dying. That, like I said, in extreme conditions, we can either make exceptions, we can call other help, we can give people gear, we can do our best, but we can't be responsible for what happens away from our shelter. We have no control over that. Well, if a homeless person dies on the street, there's an infinite number of circumstances that could cause that, and I don't know how to answer who would be specifically responsible for that. But I do know, well, first of all, if you look at our whole country, dozens of people die every day who are homeless. Some of them die from drug overdoses. Some of them die from violent crime. Some of them die from medical conditions that are untreated. Some die from environmental exposure. Cold weather is an example. And that happens to both homeless and non-homeless people every day. So I don't have an answer that would cover every possible instance of what happens. Some people, committing suicide is another thing that happens. What can society do to help at least alleviate that or to reduce that is provide more support. Basically, shelters are like the first aid part of it. They're not the solution. Shelters deal with just immediate shelter for people who are unsheltered. They don't mean a person isn't homeless anymore. It doesn't mean that everything is solved. They can get help and get directed to services. That's one thing a shelter can help with that might help them more longer term. They can maybe help them get housing, but that still leaves a vast number of people who are still going to be homeless. Different parts of the country build more shelters than others. Some cities have a high percentage of people sheltered, and honestly, the parts of the country or the specific cities that have the lowest rate of homelessness, it really comes down to they have the most affordable housing in their housing markets. So providing for that is a big thing nationwide. Fully funding programs like HUD, different HUD programs. Federal government does fully fund some things like Medicaid. If you qualify for Medicaid, it is implemented differently in different states, but looking at New Mexico, if you qualify for Medicaid, you get it. You're not put on a waiting list. If you qualify for Section 8 housing assistance, you do go on a waiting list. Food stamps, same thing. If you qualify, you get it. I would expand those programs, and I would make them uniformly national. I would make it federal instead of implemented by states individually, because some states you don't get benefits and other states you do. Some local areas have different laws about zoning and housing and where you can build affordable housing and where you can put a shelter, all these things are contentious issues, and even in Taos. Every time they build, we have a few of these low-income housing facilities. Each one of them had a big fight that added years onto their construction on where they could be, whether they could be built at all. So it's tough. So a lot of people, a lot of contractors don't want to deal with that. Um, Homeowners believe that their properties are more valuable if you don't have facilities nearby, or you don't have the kind of people who are homeless living right next door. Some of that is bias and discrimination. Some of it is possibly valid, the way our system is designed. So I may have lost the original question, but basically there is no one answer. But yes, society, I mean, individuals can do what we already discussed, which is make an effort to the best of their ability to act on the problems they know or the awareness they have, and above all, be able to accept help. And society could do things politically and economically. It wouldn't take much from the U.S. budget to house everybody, far less than many programs we're doing that aren't as beneficial. We could feed, clothe, and house everybody in this country without putting the slightest strain on our economic system. So it's really a political choice in a lot of ways. And it's partly education, because people don't really realize, or they don't think about it in the right way. I mean, the answer isn't necessarily the government just throwing money at it. It's how it's done. And so you can house people, but if you just house people and don't have other services available, so you need mental health facilities, you need more medical facilities. How we do healthcare in this country is also responsible for homelessness. Many people become homeless because they can't afford or get adequate health care, or they don't have the right kind of insurance. If somebody, even people who you wouldn't expect to end up homeless, can become so because they spend all their money, they have medical issues, and they can't work. And if you get disability, it's barely enough to live on, maybe not even enough to live on. So they lose everything. They find themselves living in their car or whatever. They have these medical issues. And national health insurance would probably get rid of a huge percentage of homelessness all by itself. Yeah, I just think that at every level, people can do more, locally, statewide, and federal and nationally, to promote having affordable housing, to promote medical and behavioral health care. And each level has different ways they can help that. So I would say local, state, and federal governments could do a lot, or a lot more. That they are doing a lot. They could do a lot more. For homeless people seeking help in Taos, right now, I'd say come to the Taos Men's Shelter and see if you can stay here, and if not, at least get other help. I work as a case manager with lots of people who don't stay at the Taos Men's Shelter. For women, it's tough because, we do have a shelter for women fleeing domestic violence. I guess I would say get services wherever you can get them. If it's through us, through other agencies in Taos, it could be going to Santa Fe. We have a bus that goes for free. Be open to part of taking responsibility is being open and following through with whatever options you actually have. Right now, it's not necessarily great options in Taos. But get the information and follow up. If you need to go to Santa Fe, go to Santa Fe.